After 6 years of banning me from the family, they had the nerve to show up at my new penthouse, so I hadn't left his room except to use the bathroom and grab terrible cafeteria sandwiches. Held his hand while machines breathed for him. Talked to him like he could hear me, about our plans for the lake house, about the trip to Ireland we'd been saving for, about anything except the possibility that he might not wake up. Have you watched family members treat you like you never existed while they divided up everything you helped build? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The coffee went cold as they stared at the folder. 6 years ago, they erased me from Daniel's funeral. Now they sat in my penthouse, asking for mercy. Have you ever been cut out of your own life by people you trusted? Have you watched family members treat you like you never existed while they divided up everything you helped build? Do you know someone who lost everything when their spouse died, only to be pushed aside by greedy relatives? Tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what happens when the powerless refuse to stay down. When documentation becomes your weapon. When patience becomes your strategy. But first, what would you do if the people who destroyed you showed up at your door 6 years later, needing your help? The elevator dinged at 8:47 p.m. Through the peephole of my downtown Chicago apartment, I saw 3 faces I'd spent 6 years trying to forget. Daniel's brother Michael. His sister Patricia. And their lawyer, the same one who'd handed me those papers at the hospital. They looked older. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying guilt. I opened the door without speaking. Let them take in the marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the leather furniture that probably cost more than their monthly mortgage payments. This wasn't the broken woman they'd thrown out of Daniel's funeral home. Margaret, Michael started, his voice shaky. We need to talk. I gestured toward the living room. Didn't offer coats. Didn't ask about their drive from Wisconsin. Just walked to my kitchen island and poured myself wine. 1 glass. They got the message. Patricia fidgeted with her purse strap. You look, well. I am well. I sat across from them, legs crossed, watching them sink into furniture that suddenly felt too expensive for comfort. Coffee? They nodded like children. While I prepared 3 cups, good china, not the everyday stuff, I listened to their whispered conversation. Something about complications, and lawyers asking questions, and maybe we should have. I placed their cups down without cream or sugar. Let them figure it out. Margaret, the lawyer cleared his throat. There have been some irregularities discovered in your husband's estate settlement. Irregularities. I repeated the word like I was tasting something bitter. Michael leaned forward. The thing is, some documents have surfaced. Things we thought were lost. I didn't react. Just sipped my wine and watched them squirm. Patricia's voice cracked. We know we hurt you. We know we handled things badly after Daniel died. But we were grieving too, Anne. Stop. My voice cut through her excuse like a blade. You banned me from my husband's funeral. You sold our lake house while I was working double shifts to pay for his medical bills. You told the funeral director I wasn't immediate family. The lawyer opened his briefcase. Mrs. Henderson, we're prepared to discuss a settlement that would be generous, considering the circumstances. I stood up and walked to my desk. Pulled out a slim folder I'd been keeping there for weeks, knowing this moment would come. Slid it across the glass coffee table. Before we discuss your generosity, I said, settling back into my chair, why don't you take a look at what I've been keeping busy with these past 6 years? Michael reached for the folder with shaking hands. His face went white as he opened it. The first page was letterhead from Cook County Probate Court. The second was a forensic accounting report. The third was a timeline of forged signatures and backdated documents. If someone tried to erase you from your own family, would you fight back or walk away? Subscribe, you'll need to see how this ends. Patricia started crying. Not the gentle tears of grief, but the ugly sobs of someone who knows they've been caught. How did you? Michael's voice trailed off. How did I what? Survive? Learn the law? Document everything you thought you'd buried? I leaned back in my chair. One email at a time, Michael. One receipt at a time. One witness statement at a time. The lawyer was speed-reading through pages, his professional composure cracking with each document. Margaret, please, Patricia whispered. We can work this out. We're family. I looked at her for a long moment. Family doesn't erase family, Patricia. As Daniel's brother reached for the first document, his face went white. The letterhead read, Cook County Probate Court. Pause and guess what document just changed everything. The heart monitor went flat at 11:47 p.m. By midnight, his sister was already making calls I wasn't supposed to hear. Daniel had been fighting for 3 days. Stroke at 52, no warning signs, no family history. One morning he was drinking coffee and reading the news on his tablet. By evening, he was on life support at Edward Hospital in Naperville. I hadn't left his room except to use the bathroom and grab terrible cafeteria sandwiches. Held his hand while machines breathed for him. Talked to him like he could hear me. About our plans for the lake house, about the trip to Ireland we'd been saving for, about anything except the possibility that he might not wake up. His family showed up in shifts. Michael drove down from Milwaukee with his wife. Patricia flew in from Wisconsin with her husband and their teenage son. They brought flowers and worried faces and hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. But something felt wrong. The whispered phone calls in the hallway. The way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The sudden interest in Daniel's business affairs, his investments, his important papers. When the machines finally stopped, when the doctors officially called time of death, I expected comfort. Arms around my shoulders. Shared tears. Plans made together for saying goodbye to the man we all loved. Instead, Patricia pulled me aside. Margaret, honey, you need to go home and rest. We'll handle the arrangements. I stared at her. Handle what arrangements? He's my husband. Of course, of course. But you're exhausted. You've been here for days. Let family take care of the details. Family. Like I wasn't family. Like 8 years of marriage, of building a life together, of being there through his father's death and his mother's dementia diagnosis, somehow didn't count. Michael appeared at my elbow. Patricia's right. Go home, get some sleep. We'll call you tomorrow with the details. Details about what? The service. The burial. You know, everything. That's when I heard Patricia on her phone in the corner, voice low but not quite low enough. No, just immediate family. We'll keep it small and private. My stomach dropped. I walked closer. The notice should just list siblings and parents. Yes, I know he's gone, but still, we want to keep this dignified. She saw me listening and turned away, but not before I caught the next part. The nurse? Oh, she'll understand. It's really a family matter. The nurse. That's how she described me to whoever was on the other end of that call. Not Daniel's wife. Not the woman who'd rushed to every emergency room visit, who'd learned to give insulin shots, who'd held his hand through 2 surgeries. The nurse. I didn't say anything. Just grabbed my purse from beside Daniel's bed, kissed his forehead one last time, and walked out of that hospital room. 3 days later, I drove to St. Mary's Cemetery for the funeral. The security guard at the gate had a list. My name wasn't on it. The funeral director handed me a card. I'm sorry, he whispered. They said you weren't immediate family. Ever been excluded from something that was rightfully yours? The email account autologged me in 6 months later. That's when I found the draft will, dated 3 days before Daniel's stroke. I'd been living in a studio apartment in Schaumburg, working night shifts at Rush University Medical Center. 12-hour shifts, 3 days a week, Just enough to cover rent and groceries and the minimum payments on credit cards I'd maxed out paying for Daniel's medical expenses his insurance wouldn't cover. The apartment came furnished, which was good because I owned almost nothing anymore. A few clothes, some books, the coffee maker Daniel gave me for my birthday, and a manila folder full of papers I'd grabbed from our house before his family changed the locks. I'd tried to go through that folder a dozen times, but the legal language made my head hurt and my heart ache. Property deeds with names I didn't recognize. Investment statements showing accounts I'd never heard of. Insurance policies with beneficiaries listed in tiny print that blurred when I tried to focus. The laptop was Daniel's old one from work. I'd kept it mostly for the photos. Pictures of us at the lake house, vacation shots from Colorado, random Tuesday morning selfies that seemed precious now that Tuesday mornings would always be just me. That Thursday evening in October, I opened the laptop to look at photos and noticed his email was still logged in. Gmail had kept him signed in automatically, the way it does when you check the Remember Me box. His inbox was mostly spam by then, 6 months of car dealership sales and grocery store coupons and pharmacy reminders for medications he'd never pick up. But there was a folder I'd never noticed before. Drafts. Inside were 3 emails he'd started but never sent. One to his brother about borrowing the truck for yard work. One to our insurance agent about increasing coverage on the lake house. And one with no recipient address, no subject line, just an attachment labeled, Final Will, Draft 3. My hands shook as I downloaded it. The document opened in Microsoft Word, dated March 15th. Exactly 3 days before his stroke. The header read, Last Will and Testament of Daniel Robert Henderson. I scrolled down through pages of legal language until I found the part that mattered. I hereby give, devise, and bequeath all of my property, real and personal, of every kind and description, wherever located, to my beloved wife, Margaret Ann Henderson, to be hers absolutely and forever. My beloved wife. Not the nurse. Not someone to be excluded from family matters. His beloved wife. Below that were detailed instructions about the lake house, about his retirement accounts, about the small life insurance policy through his work. Everything was supposed to come to me. Not divided among siblings. Not held in trust. All of it, to me. One hidden email can change your entire future. Subscribe so you don't miss the digital clues that matter. But this was just a draft. Unsent, unsigned, legally meaningless. I kept reading, looking for clues about whether he'd actually filed something official. That's when I found attachment 2. A property deed for a downtown Chicago condominium I'd never seen. Purchase date, February 28, just 2 weeks before his stroke. Purchase price, $850,000. And in the section marked, Intended Beneficiary upon death, typed in Daniel's careful all-caps style, Margaret Ann Henderson. Attachment 2 was a property deed, for a penthouse I'd never seen. My name was typed in the beneficiary line. What would you do with proof they tried to hide? He read the email draft without speaking. Then he pulled out a legal pad and drew a timeline. Jake Morrison looked like he was fresh out of law school, probably 28, maybe 30 tops. His office in downtown Milwaukee was small, just 2 rooms with second-hand furniture and law books that looked well used. But he came recommended by the legal aid clinic, and more importantly, he was the only lawyer who didn't ask for a retainer I couldn't afford. I'd driven up on a Saturday morning, the manila folder and printed emails in a grocery bag beside me. The receptionist wasn't in, so Jake answered his own door in jeans and a button-down shirt that needed ironing. Miss Henderson? Come in, please. Coffee? His office smelled like old books and fresh coffee. A window overlooked the street where people were heading to farmers market with reusable bags and weekend plans. Normal people living normal lives, not sitting in lawyers' offices trying to prove they hadn't been erased from legal documents. Jake spread my papers across his desk like puzzle pieces. Started with the email draft, then the property deed, then the various documents from the manila folder. He didn't ask questions, just read and made notes on his legal pad. After 20 minutes, he looked up. Tell me about the probate process. What do you remember? I wasn't included. They said I wasn't immediate family. I got a form letter about 6 weeks after Daniel died, saying the estate had been settled and there were no distributions assigned to me. Who handled it? His family's lawyer. Same guy who was in my living room last night, actually. Jake's eyebrows went up. They came to see you? With a settlement offer. That's what got me motivated to finally bring these papers somewhere. He flipped to a clean page and started drawing. A timeline, with dates marked in careful handwriting. Daniel's stroke, March 18th, death, March 21st. This draft will, March 15th, 3 days before the stroke. He drew arrows and circles, connecting dates and events. Probate filing, April 2nd. That's unusually fast. Illinois law requires a waiting period, unless there are emergency circumstances. What kind of emergency circumstances? Outstanding debts that need immediate attention. Business partnerships that can't wait. Urgent medical decisions for dependent family members. He looked at me. None of which applied to Daniel's situation, based on what you've told me. Jake circled 3 more dates. The property deed shows purchase on February 28th, filing with Cook County Recorder, March 20th, the day before Daniel died. Probate petition filed April 2nd. He tapped his pen against the legal pad. Margaret, this timeline is problematic. The property deed was filed while Daniel was on life support, probably unconscious. The probate was rushed through in less than 2 weeks. And somehow, a property worth nearly $1 million just disappeared from the estate inventory. I felt something that had been twisted tight in my chest for 6 months start to loosen. So I'm not crazy. Something really is wrong. Something is very wrong. But wrong doesn't always mean illegal, and illegal doesn't always mean we can prove it. He leaned back in his chair. The question is, how much do you want to fight, and how far are you willing to go? Jake circled 3 dates. These signatures happened after the funeral. That's impossible, unless someone forged them. Screenshot those 3 dates. You'll see why they matter. The clerk pulled the file and frowned. This probate was rushed through in 72 hours. That never happens. I'd spent my Tuesday off work at the Cook County Law Library, reading everything I could find about Illinois probate law. Turns out, when someone dies, there's supposed to be a process. Notice periods. Waiting times. Opportunities for interested parties to object. None of that happened with Daniel's case. The law library smelled like old paper and desperation. Rows of people hunched over thick books, some in suits, others in scrubs like me, all trying to figure out how the legal system had failed them. I fit right in. After 4 hours of reading statutes and case law, I walked over to the courthouse. The probate clerk's office was on the 3rd floor, behind glass windows that made everything feel official and intimidating. I need to review a probate file, I told the woman behind the counter. Henderson, Daniel Robert. Filed in April. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin folder. You can review it at that table over there. No photos, no removing documents. The file was maybe 20 pages. For a man who owned property, had investments, carried life insurance, and ran a small consulting business, 20 pages seemed light. I started reading. The petition for probate was filed April 2nd by Michael Henderson, as surviving brother and closest living relative. No mention of a spouse. The supporting documents showed a will dated 2 years earlier, leaving everything to surviving family members in equal shares. But here's what made my hands shake: the witnesses. Illinois law requires 2 witnesses to sign a will, and those witnesses have to be what they call disinterested parties, people who don't benefit from the will. The 2 signatures on Daniel's supposed will belong to Michael Henderson and Patricia Henderson Walsh. His siblings. The same people who inherited everything. I flipped through the inventory of assets. The lake house, $340,000. Investment accounts, $180,000. Life insurance, $100,000. Business assets, $45,000. Total estate value, $665,000. No mention of the downtown Chicago property worth $850,000. I walked back to the counter. Excuse me, is this the complete file? The clerk looked at the folder. That's everything we have on file. What about property deeds? Real estate transfers? Those would be recorded separately, with the recorder of deeds. Different office, different floor. 20 minutes later, I was on the second floor, requesting records for any property transfers involving Daniel Robert Henderson in the past year. The recorder's office computer system showed 3 transactions. February 28th, purchase of downtown condominium, $850,000. Buyer, Daniel R. Henderson. March 20th, transfer of lake house deed from joint ownership, Daniel and Margaret Henderson, to sole ownership, Daniel R. Henderson. Filed by Michael Henderson, power of attorney. April 15th, transfer of downtown condominium from Daniel R. Henderson to Henderson Family Trust. Filed by Patricia Henderson Walsh, executor of estate. I stared at that screen for 5 minutes. They'd removed my name from the lake house deed while Daniel was dying in the hospital. Then they'd transferred the downtown property, the one worth more than everything else combined, into a family trust that somehow never appeared in the probate file. The witness signatures belonged to 2 people, Daniel's siblings. Both signed as neutral parties. Is it legal for family members to witness each other's probate? Guess before the next chapter. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping, the forensic accountant said, sliding spreadsheets across his desk. This is construction. David Chen's office was in a glass tower downtown Chicago, the kind of building where serious money gets counted and recounted. He specialized in financial investigations, divorce cases, business disputes, estate fraud. Jake had recommended him after reviewing the Cook County records. I don't usually take cases this small, David said, but your lawyer explained the circumstances. I'm curious to see what we're dealing with. I'd given him copies of everything, the email drafts, the property records, the probate file, bank statements I'd managed to collect from our joint accounts before they were closed. David had turned it all into numbers. Clean columns, highlighted discrepancies, timeline charts that made the theft look like what it was, systematic and deliberate. Let's start with the basic math, he said, pointing to a summary sheet. According to the probate filing, Daniel's total estate was valued at $665,000. But the property records show he purchased an $850,000 condominium just 3 weeks before his death. Right. So the estate should have been worth at least $1.5 million. At least. But here's where it gets interesting. He flipped to another page. The financing for that downtown property shows a cash purchase. $850,000, paid in full, money transferred from an account that was closed the day after the property deed was filed. Closed by who? Michael Henderson. Power of attorney, dated March 19th, while Daniel was on life support. David's spreadsheet showed a timeline of financial transactions that made my stomach hurt. March 18th, March 19th, power of attorney signed by Michael Henderson, Daniel unconscious. March 20th, $850,000 transferred from Daniel's business account to real estate purchase. March 20th, my name removed from lake house deed. March 21st, Daniel dies. March 22nd. Business account closed, remaining $340,000 transferred to estate management. April 2nd, probate filed, showing estate value of $665,000. The power of attorney is the key, David explained. In Illinois, you can't grant power of attorney while unconscious or mentally incapacitated. But somehow, Michael Henderson had legal authority to move nearly $1 million while Daniel was brain dead from a stroke. He pulled out another document. This is the signature card from the bank. Compare it to Daniel's actual signature from the property purchase 3 weeks earlier. I looked at both signatures. I wasn't a handwriting expert, but I'd seen Daniel sign thousands of documents over 8 years. The power of attorney signature was shaky, uncertain. The property purchase signature was strong and confident. They built their lie with numbers. Subscribe, you need to see how numbers can build justice too. Can we prove the signature was forged? We can raise questions. But forgery is a criminal matter, and criminal cases need evidence beyond doubt. Civil cases just need probability. David leaned back in his chair. Margaret, what we have here is a pattern of financial manipulation that began before Daniel died and continued after. The question is, do you want to file a civil lawsuit challenging the probate, or do you want to try to prove criminal fraud? What's the difference? Civil lawsuit gets you money. Criminal charges get them jail time. Page 12 showed the Penthouse transfer, signed by Margaret. Except she'd never seen that document. Predict, how did they forge her signature? I drove to Lake Geneva on a Tuesday morning. The house Daniel bought for us had a sold sign in the yard. The drive from Chicago took 2 hours through Wisconsin farmland and small towns that looked like postcards. I'd made this trip dozens of times with Daniel, usually on summer weekends when we wanted to escape the city heat and pretend we were the kind of people who owned lake houses. We were going to retire there. Spend our mornings drinking coffee on the dock, our afternoons reading books in the screened porch, our evenings watching sunsets over water that stretched beyond the horizon. We'd picked out furniture for the guest room, planned a garden for the backyard, talked about getting a dog for the first time in either of our lives. Now there was a sold sign stuck in the front yard like a gravestone. The house looked smaller than I remembered. White clapboard siding, blue shutters, a wraparound porch that needed fresh stain. The dock where we'd planned to spend our retirement was empty except for a pair of ducks floating in lazy circles. I parked across the street and just sat there for a while, trying to decide what I was hoping to accomplish. The house was gone. I couldn't change that by staring at it. That's when Mrs. Henderson from next door came walking over with a casserole dish in her hands. Margaret? Margaret, is that you? Eleanor Henderson was 70-something. With white hair always in a perfect curl and a way of appearing with food whenever anyone in the neighborhood was having trouble. She'd brought us cookies when we first bought the place, invited us to 4th of July barbecues, kept an eye on the house during the winter months when we couldn't get up from Chicago. Eleanor, hi. I got out of the car, not sure what to say. Oh honey, I was so sorry to hear about Daniel. Such a shock. And so young. She balanced the casserole dish in one hand and patted my arm with the other. I kept watching for you to come up and deal with the house, but then I saw the for sale signs and, well, I didn't know what to think. It's complicated, I said. It always is, dear. Family and money make everything complicated. She glanced at the sold sign. The new owners seem nice enough. Young couple from Madison. They're planning to put in a new kitchen. We stood there looking at the house where Daniel and I were supposed to grow old together. Margaret, I have something for you. Eleanor shifted the casserole dish to her other hand. Daniel stopped by last summer, right before he got sick. He brought me an envelope and asked me to keep it safe. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you directly. Not to family, not to lawyers. To you. My heart stopped. An envelope? He was very specific about it. If I die, Eleanor, this goes to Margaret. Nobody else. Those were his exact words. She handed me the casserole dish. Wait right here. Eleanor disappeared into her house and returned with a manila envelope, sealed, with my name written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Mrs. Henderson from next door handed me an envelope. Daniel left this for you last summer. What do you think Daniel left behind for Margaret? The text message was 3 words, motion granted. I didn't celebrate. I planned. Jake had filed an emergency motion to preserve all remaining assets in Daniel's estate, based on David Chen's forensic accounting report and the evidence of financial irregularities we discovered. The motion asked the court to freeze any further transfers or sales until we could conduct a full investigation. I was at work when the text came through, halfway through a 12-hour shift in the cardiac unit at Rush. I read it twice, then slipped my phone back into my scrubs pocket and continued checking on Mr. Patterson in room 314, who was recovering from bypass surgery. But inside, something had shifted. For 6 months, I'd felt like I was drowning in paperwork and legal language and other people's decisions about my life. Now, for the first time, I had some control back. The motion covered everything. The family trust that held the downtown property, the proceeds from the lake house sale, the investment accounts that had been distributed to Michael and Patricia. All of it was now off limits until further notice. I got home from work at 8 a.m. Wednesday morning and found something that made me laugh out loud, a thick cream-colored envelope in my mailbox, expensive paper, formal script addressing. An invitation. The Henderson Family Foundation cordially invites you to the first annual Daniel R. Henderson Memorial Scholarship Dinner, benefiting deserving students in the healthcare field. The event was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Palmer House Hotel. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7, presentation of the inaugural scholarship at 8:30. Below the formal invitation text, someone had handwritten a note: Margaret, we hope you can join us for this special evening honoring Daniel's memory and his commitment to healthcare education. Your presence would mean so much to the family. It was signed by Patricia. The same Patricia who'd banned me from Daniel's funeral was now inviting me to a scholarship dinner in his honor. Using money that was supposed to be mine to fund scholarships for healthcare students like I'd been 20 years ago. The invitation listed a planning committee, Michael Henderson, Patricia Henderson Walsh, and their lawyer, Thomas Morrison. At the bottom, in smaller print, it mentioned that generous founding gift from the Daniel R. Henderson Memorial Trust. I sat at my kitchen table, holding this invitation and thinking about the timing. Jake had filed our preservation order on Monday. The court granted it Tuesday. And somehow, by Wednesday morning, I was being invited to watch Daniel's family give away money that legally couldn't be touched. Either they'd planned this scholarship dinner months ago, or they were moving fast to spend assets before the court could stop them. I called Jake. They can't distribute trust assets while the preservation order is in effect, he said. If they try to give away money at this dinner, they'll be in contempt of court. So I should go? You should definitely go. Take pictures. Document everything. If they're planning to violate a court order in public, we want evidence. A tribute, curated by the person who erased me. Attend or avoid? What would you do? They displayed Daniel's favorite books like museum pieces. I'd bought half of them. My name wasn't on any placard. The Palmer House Hotel ballroom was decorated in navy blue and gold, Daniel's favorite colors from his college days. Round tables for 8, centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath, a slideshow of photos cycling on screens around the room. I recognized most of the faces in those photos. Daniel at his college graduation. Daniel with his parents at Christmas. Daniel fishing with Michael at the lake house. Daniel and Patricia at her wedding. Daniel alone at various work events and family gatherings. What I didn't see were any photos of Daniel with me. 8 years together, hundreds of pictures, and somehow none of them had made it into the memorial slideshow. I'd worn my best black dress, the one Daniel bought me for my nursing school graduation. Arrived 15 minutes after the cocktail hour started, walked straight to the registration table with my invitation. Margaret Henderson, I told the volunteer handling check-ins. She scanned her list, looked confused, scanned again. I don't see, oh wait, here you are. Margaret Henderson, guest of the family. Table 12. Table 12 was in the back corner, behind a pillar, with a view of the kitchen doors instead of the stage. I found my assigned seat and settled in to observe. The tables up front were filled with people I recognized from Daniel's work, from the Lake House neighborhood, from Patricia's country club. The kind of people who wrote donation checks and attended charity dinners and believed whatever story they'd been told about the grieving family creating a scholarship in Daniel's honor. Michael stood up to welcome everyone, microphone in hand, looking comfortable in his navy suit and speaking like someone who'd never doubted his right to be in charge. Thank you all for joining us tonight to honor my brother Daniel's memory and his lifelong commitment to healthcare education. As many of you know, Daniel was passionate about helping others achieve their dreams of serving in the medical field. Polite applause. I noticed the table of Daniel's work colleagues nodding along, probably remembering conversations about supporting nursing students or medical research that I'd encouraged him to have. Patricia took the microphone next. The Henderson Family Foundation is proud to announce our inaugural scholarship recipient, selected from over 200 applicants based on academic excellence, financial need, and commitment to serving others. More applause. The slideshow switched to photos of scholarship applications, acceptance letters, proud families at graduation ceremonies. All very heartwarming and photogenic. But while Patricia spoke about Daniel's generous spirit and commitment to education, I was watching the head table. Specifically, I was watching Thomas Morrison, the family lawyer, lean over to whisper something to Michael. Missing one conversation can cost you everything. Subscribe to catch the signals others miss. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could read Michael's reaction. His face went tight, he checked his phone, then whispered something back that made Morrison nod grimly. That's when I heard it. A fragment of conversation from the table next to mine, where two men in expensive suits were discussing business over their salads. Complete liquidation by Christmas. Transfer everything offshore, close the trust, make it all disappear. One of them noticed me listening and lowered his voice, but I'd heard enough. Complete transfer by Christmas, I checked my calendar. 6 weeks away. Screenshot that deadline. It becomes everything. 7:43 p.m., Sunday, the planner read. Signature witnessed. No principal present. The paralegal who handled Daniel's probate called me at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night. I was getting ready for bed after another 12-hour shift when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Margaret Henderson? Daniel Henderson's wife? Yes, who's this? My name is Lisa Chen. I worked, at Morrison and Associates. I was the paralegal who processed your husband's estate. I sat down hard on my couch. Morrison and Associates was Thomas Morrison's law firm, the same Morrison who'd been whispering urgent messages to Michael at the scholarship dinner. I can't sleep, Lisa continued, her voice shaky. I keep thinking about that file, about how wrong everything felt, and I finally decided I had to call you. What do you mean, wrong? Can we meet somewhere? I have some things you need to see. An hour later, I was sitting across from Lisa Chen at a 24-hour diner in Schaumburg. She looked like she was maybe 25, with short black hair and the kind of tired eyes that come from working too many late nights on other people's problems. I've been at Morrison's for 3 years, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. I've processed maybe 200 estate cases. I know how they're supposed to work. She pulled a manila folder from her bag. Your husband's case was unusual. Unusual how? The timeline, for one thing. Most probate cases take 6 months minimum, sometimes years if there are complications. Daniel's went from filing to final distribution in 6 weeks. Lisa opened the folder and spread out documents like she was building a case. Look at these timestamps. She showed me a log of activities on Daniel's file. April 2nd, 9:15 a.m. Probate petition filed April 2nd, 2:30 p.m. Inventory of assets submitted. April 3rd, 11:45 a.m. Notice to creditors published, minimum required, April 8th, 4:20 p.m. Will admitted to probate April 15th, 6:30 p.m. Final distribution authorized. See the problem? Lisa asked. Illinois law requires a 6-month waiting period for creditor claims. We got judicial approval to waive that waiting period based on emergency circumstances that didn't actually exist. She flipped to another page. But here's the really strange part. Most of the key documents were prepared and signed on Sundays. Sundays? The office is closed Sundays. No notary, no witnesses, no supervision. But somehow we have notarized signatures on documents dated Sunday afternoons. Lisa pulled out a scheduling log. April 7th, Sunday, 7:43 p.m. Will witnessed and notarized. But the building security logs show no entry for any Morrison and Associates employees that day. I stared at the documents. So how did they get notarized? That's what I keep asking myself. And that's why I can't sleep. Lisa leaned across the table. Mrs. Henderson, I think someone forged those signatures. And I think Mr. Morrison knew about it. She reached into her bag again and pulled out one more document. I made copies before I left the firm last week. Access logs, building closed. Entry, never. Is this enough to challenge the entire probate? Their lawyer's letter arrived certified mail. My response went out same-day delivery, thicker and sharper. The letter from Morrison and Associates came on a Tuesday morning, thick cream paper with raised letterhead that screamed expensive. I signed for it at my apartment door, still in scrubs from my overnight shift, and read it standing in my hallway. Notice of defamation and harassment claims, the header read. Below that, 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to one message: stop digging, or we'll destroy what's left of your life. They accused me of making false and malicious statements about the Henderson family, of harassing witnesses, and interfering with lawful estate administration. They demanded I cease all investigative activities, and threatened to seek damages for emotional distress and harm to family reputation. I read it twice, then called Jake. They're scared, he said after I read him the key parts. This is what lawyers do when they know they're caught. They throw around big words and hope you back down. Are you scared? Margaret, I've been preparing for this since we filed the preservation order. Come to Milwaukee tomorrow. Bring everything Lisa gave you. It's time to show them what real legal documents look like. Thursday afternoon, I sat in Jake's office while he assembled our response. Not just a letter this time, but a comprehensive filing that would make their intimidation tactics look like children playing dress-up. Civil action for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional interference with inheritance rights, Jake read from the cover page. Margaret Henderson versus Michael Henderson, Patricia Henderson Walsh, Thomas Morrison, and Morrison and Associates. The filing was 47 pages. Jake had organized every piece of evidence we'd collected into a narrative that read like a crime novel, except everything was documented with exhibits, timestamps, and witness statements. Exhibit A, Daniel's email draft showing his true intentions for the estate. Exhibit B, forged power of attorney signatures with handwriting analysis. Exhibit C, financial records showing the concealed downtown property. Exhibit D, Lisa Chen's sworn affidavit about irregularities in the probate process. Exhibit E, building security logs contradicting notarization dates. The beauty of this approach, Jake explained, is that we're not just defending against their threats. We're going on offense. They wanted to play hardball? Let's see how they handle a federal court filing. Federal court? Wire fraud. Mail fraud. Conspiracy to commit theft. When you forge signatures and move money across state lines, it becomes federal business. Jake had also included something I hadn't expected, a request for punitive damages. Not just the return of stolen assets, but additional money as punishment for the deliberate and systematic nature of their theft. How much? I asked. $2.7 million. Triple the value of what they stole, plus legal fees, plus. The final section of our filing was my favorite part. A detailed accounting of every asset that should be returned to me, every document that should be corrected, and every legal proceeding that should be reopened. But the last paragraph was what made me smile. Evidence speaks louder than threats. The defendants' recent attempts at intimidation only confirmed their consciousness of guilt and their fear of public scrutiny. Their letter had been 3 pages of bluster. Our response was a legal weapon with 47 pages of ammunition. Court date set, December 15th. The same week as their complete transfer deadline. Ever fought back against people who underestimated you? The judge asked for the original will. I placed it on the evidence table. Daniel's siblings went pale. Cook County Courthouse at 9 a.m. on December 15 looked like every courtroom drama you've ever seen, except the stakes were real and the outcome would determine whether I spent the rest of my life working 12-hour shifts or finally got to live the future Daniel had planned for us. Judge Patricia Williams was 50-something, with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from 20 years of listening to people lie under oath. She'd reviewed our filing in advance, along with the defense response that basically amounted to, "We did nothing wrong and Margaret is mentally unstable." I sat behind Jake at the plaintiff's table, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to Daniel's memorial dinner. Michael and Patricia sat across the aisle with Thomas Morrison and 2 associates from his firm. They looked like they'd dressed for a funeral. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of probate proceedings in the matter of Daniel Robert Henderson," Judge Williams announced. "Mr. Morrison, you filed the original probate petition. Please summarize your position." Jake stood up. "Your Honor, we represent Margaret Henderson, the decedent's widow. We're challenging the entire probate based on evidence of fraud, forgery, and systematic asset concealment." "Mr. Morrison?" The judge turned to the defense table. Thomas Morrison stood, adjusted his tie, and launched into a speech about grief-stricken family members trying to honor their deceased brother's wishes while being harassed by a disturbed individual making wild accusations. The will in question was properly executed, witnessed, and filed according to Illinois probate law. Mrs. Henderson's claims are baseless and motivated by financial desperation. That's when Jake opened his briefcase. "Your Honor, we have the original will here. Not the document filed in probate, but the actual final will that Daniel Henderson prepared 3 days before his stroke." He walked to the evidence table and placed down the printed email draft we'd found on Daniel's laptop. Next to it, he set the handwritten notes from the envelope Eleanor Henderson had given me at Lake Geneva. These documents clearly show the decedent's intention to leave his entire estate to his wife, Margaret Henderson. The will filed in probate was dated 2 years earlier and was superseded by this final version. Morrison jumped up. "Your Honor, that's not an original will. That's a computer printout. It has no legal validity." "Mr. Morrison is correct about the format," Jake replied calmly. "But Illinois law recognizes holographic wills written in the decedent's own handwriting. And we have that too." He placed Daniel's handwritten notes on the evidence table. 3 pages of careful cursive, dated March 15, outlining his wishes for the distribution of assets. Judge Williams put on her reading glasses and walked to the evidence table. She spent 10 minutes examining both documents, comparing signatures, checking dates. "The handwriting appears consistent with other samples in the file," she said finally. "Mr. Morrison, how do you explain the timeline discrepancy? Your client filed a will dated 2 years ago, but these documents are dated 3 days before the decedent's death. Truth wins in the end, but only if you document everything. Subscribe to learn how evidence builds justice." Morrison's face was red. "Your Honor, we need time to authenticate these documents. We request a continuance to conduct our own handwriting analysis." Motion denied. "We'll proceed." The judge called a 30-minute recess. When court resumed, Daniel's brother requested a private conference. "Predict, settlement offer or continued fight?" They offered half. I countered with everything, plus interest and legal fees. The conference room next to Judge Williams' courtroom felt like a boxing ring after the final bell. Michael and Patricia sat on one side of the polished wooden table, their lawyer on the other end looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Jake and I faced them across documents scattered like battlefield casualties. "Let's be clear about the situation," Jake began, his voice steady and professional. "The original probate was based on fraudulent documents. The property transfers were made without legal authority. The signatures were forged. This isn't a negotiation about who gets what. This is a discussion about how much additional compensation my client deserves for 6 years of financial hardship caused by your deliberate actions." Thomas Morrison loosened his tie. "My clients are prepared to offer a settlement that recognizes Mrs. Henderson's circumstances. 50% of the estate value as determined in the original probate, plus reasonable attorney fees." I looked at Jake. He shook his head slightly. Your calculation is based on the estate value you reported to the court, I said. But we both know the real estate value was almost twice that amount. You hid the downtown property, sold our lake house without my knowledge, and distributed assets that legally belonged to me. Patricia finally spoke up. Margaret, we know we handled things badly. We were grieving, and we made mistakes. But Daniel is gone, and fighting about money won't bring him back. This isn't about bringing him back. This is about honoring what he wanted. And what he wanted was for his wife to be taken care of, not erased from his life like I never existed. Michael cleared his throat. What do you want? Jake slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Full restoration of all estate assets to Mrs. Henderson, as the rightful beneficiary. Return of the downtown property. Reimbursement for all proceeds from the lake house sale. Transfer of all investment accounts and insurance benefits. Plus damages for 6 years of lost income and emotional distress. Morrison scanned the document. This is everything. Plus nearly $1 million in additional damages. Your clients engaged in a conspiracy to defraud my client of her inheritance. They forged legal documents. They committed perjury in court filings. They transferred assets illegally. The damages are actually quite reasonable considering the scope of the criminal activity. The room went quiet except for the sound of Morrison flipping through pages and whispering urgently with Michael and Patricia. We need time to discuss this privately, Morrison said. You have 15 minutes, Jake replied. Judge Williams is waiting for our response. After they left the room, I turned to Jake. Do you think they'll accept? They don't have a choice. If this goes to trial, the criminal referral becomes public record. Michael's business, Patricia's social standing, Morrison's law license. All of it gets dragged through the newspapers. They know they're caught. 12 minutes later, they came back. We accept the terms, Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. The mediator slid the agreement across the table. I read every word twice before signing. Take the settlement or demand full trial? What would you choose? The keys felt heavier than they should. This wasn't just an apartment, it was proof that truth has weight. The downtown Chicago penthouse Daniel had bought for us 3 weeks before his stroke was everything he described in his emails to Eleanor Henderson. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing Lake Michigan. Marble countertops in the kitchen. A master bedroom large enough for the king-size bed we'd talked about buying. A second bedroom he'd planned to use as his office. I walked through it slowly on a Saturday morning in January, taking inventory of the space Daniel had imagined us sharing. The previous tenants. A young couple who'd been renting it from the Henderson Family Trust, had left it clean and empty. Just hardwood floors and morning light and the promise of a life I was finally free to live. The moving truck arrived at noon with everything I owned, which wasn't much after 6 years in a studio apartment. My clothes, Daniel's coffee maker, the manila folder that started this whole fight, and a dozen boxes of books. It looked sparse in a space designed for a full life. But I had time now. Time to buy furniture and choose paint colors and figure out what I wanted this place to become. The settlement had included enough money to quit my job at Rush, to stop working night shifts and sleeping during the day and measuring my life in 12-hour increments. I unpacked Daniel's photo first, the one from our trip to Colorado, both of us squinting into mountain sunlight and grinning like we discovered something nobody else knew about. I placed it on the mantel above a fireplace I hadn't even noticed during my first walkthrough. The second box contained Daniel's books. The ones I'd bought for him, the ones he'd bought for himself, the ones we'd bought together at bookstores in small towns during weekend drives. I arranged them on built-in shelves in the living room, trying to remember which ones he'd read twice and which ones he'd been saving for retirement. By evening, the apartment felt less empty. Not full, exactly, but inhabited. Like a place where someone lived instead of just stayed. I made dinner in the kitchen Daniel had chosen, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, and ate it at the dining room table while watching the sun set over water that stretched beyond the horizon. This was the view he'd wanted us to wake up to every morning. This was the life he'd planned for us. Every ending is someone's new beginning. Subscribe to see how justice creates second chances. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. How does it feel? I typed back, like home. But that wasn't quite right. It felt like possibility. Like the beginning of something I hadn't been able to imagine for 6 years. Like proof that fighting for what's yours, even when everyone tells you to give up, sometimes actually works. I was washing dishes when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar face I hadn't expected to see again. Daniel's brother Michael, holding an envelope and looking like he'd aged another 10 years since our settlement conference. The doorbell rang at 8 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel's brother holding an envelope. What could they possibly want now? He didn't ask to come in. He just handed me the envelope and said, "Daniel would be proud of you." Michael Henderson stood in my hallway looking smaller than I remembered. The confident man who'd spoken at memorial dinners and signed legal documents and moved money around like chess pieces was gone. In his place was someone who looked tired and maybe a little relieved. "I won't keep you," he said, extending the manila envelope toward me. "Patricia and I talked, and we decided you should have these. They belong to Daniel. They should have gone to you 6 years ago." I took the envelope but didn't open it. Why now? Because we were wrong. About everything. About how we handled his death, about what we thought he would have wanted, about... He paused, searching for words. About who you were to him. We stood there for a moment, the weight of 6 years sitting between us like something that needed to be acknowledged but didn't need to be discussed. "He talked about you all the time," Michael continued. "At family dinners, during phone calls, whenever we visited the lake house. Patricia and I thought it was just, newlywed happiness. We didn't realize how serious he was about building a life with you. Serious enough to change his will 3 days before he died." Yeah. We found his notebook last month, when we were cleaning out Mom's house. Pages of plans for your retirement, for the penthouse, for trips you were going to take together. He'd been planning this for months. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. "What's in here?" "Things we should have given you at the hospital. His watch, some letters he wrote but never sent, photos from before we knew you." Michael shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "And something else. Something he asked me to keep safe, but only until he could give it to you himself." Through the envelope, I could feel the shape of a small box. "Margaret, I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I know we can't give you back those 6 years, or the funeral, or the way we treated you when you were grieving too." He looked directly at me for the first time since I'd opened the door. "But Daniel would be proud of how you fought for what was right. He always said you were stronger than people realized." I felt something inside my chest that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something close to peace. "Thank you," I said. Michael nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "The scholarship fund is still running, Patricia wants to change the name to include your name too, if you'd be okay with that. The Daniel and Margaret Henderson Healthcare Scholarship." I considered this. What would Daniel think about that? I think he'd love it. After Michael left, I sat on my couch overlooking the lake and opened the envelope slowly. His watch was there, the one I'd given him for our 3rd anniversary. 3 letters addressed to me but never sent, full of plans and dreams and promises about our future. Photos of us I'd never seen, taken by family members during holidays I'd forgotten about. And at the bottom, a small velvet box containing a necklace with a pendant shaped like a key. I opened the envelope alone. Inside was Daniel's handwriting. "For Margaret, who never stopped believing in us."